Megawatts on your mind from Lighthief. We build it, we run it, we know what works, real projects, real returns. The Renewable Energy podcast that doesn't waste your time. Let's go.
Hello and welcome back to Megawatts on Your Mind. This is Lighthief, and today we're venturing well beyond Western Europe's comfortable borders. We're talking about Central Asia, specifically Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Three former Soviet republics that most people in the European renewable energy industry know almost nothing about, despite representing some of the most interesting emerging opportunities in the sector. When we tell people that Lighthief has offices in Kazakhstan and operates across Central Asia, the reactions are fairly predictable. Kazakhstan? Isn't that Borat country? Yes, thank you, very helpful. Uzbekistan? Where exactly is that? Between Afghanistan and Kazakhstan. Kyrgyzstan? Can you even spell that? Kyrgyzstan. Not as difficult as it looks. But behind the jokes and the geographical confusion, Central Asia represents something genuinely interesting for renewable energy development. These are countries with extraordinary solar and wind resources, some of the best in Eurasia. They have rapidly growing electricity demand as their economies develop. They have governments actively seeking to diversify away from fossil fuel dependence. And critically, they have much less competition than mature European markets. They also have substantial challenges. Political risk that would make even Romanian developers nervous. Currency volatility that makes the Polish zloty look stable. Infrastructure quality that occasionally recalls the 1980s. Corruption that requires extremely careful navigation. Cultural and business practices quite different from Europe. And distances. We're talking about countries where a near BA project site might be 1,000 kilometers away. So why are we there? Why did Lighthief establish presence in Kazakhstan and expand across the region? Simple. Because the risk-adjusted returns, if you know what you're doing, can be substantially better than in overcrowded European markets. And because being early in emerging markets creates competitive advantages that last for years. Today we're going to walk through each of these three countries. We'll discuss what the renewable energy market looks like, what support mechanisms exist, whether you can actually get financing, what the development process involves, and what can go spectacularly wrong. We'll talk about why we believe these markets have genuine potential and why we're willing to accept the risks involved. This episode is for developers and investors with emerging market appetite, for companies seeking geographic diversification beyond Europe, and for anyone curious about what renewable energy development looks like in regions that most Western developers wouldn't touch with a 3-meter pole. Fair warning, if you're risk-averse or uncomfortable with emerging market dynamics, these markets aren't for you. But if you have experience in challenging environments and understand that higher risk can mean higher returns, Central Asia might be worth your attention. Shall we begin? And perhaps find Kazakhstan on a map before we do? Let's start with Kazakhstan, the largest and most economically developed of the three countries. Kazakhstan is genuinely huge. The 9th largest country in the world by area, roughly the size of Western Europe. It has 18 to 19 million people, substantial oil and gas resources, and an economy that's been growing steadily despite various global and regional crises. Kazakhstan's energy system is interesting. The country has abundant fossil fuel resources. It's one of the world's top 20 oil producers and has substantial coal reserves. Historically, electricity came almost entirely from aging Soviet-era thermal power plants. But Kazakhstan's government recognized several problems. The old plants are inefficient and polluting, electricity demand is growing faster than existing capacity can supply, and international pressure to reduce emissions is increasing. Around 2013 to 2014, Kazakhstan introduced renewable energy auctions, competitive tenders where developers bid to build projects at fixed tariffs. The mechanism is relatively straightforward. Projects winning auctions receive 15-year power purchase agreements with the state-owned settlement company at guaranteed tariffs. The auctions cover solar, wind, and hydro. The auction results have been mixed but generally functional. Early auctions had relatively high tariffs, $50 to $70 per megawatt hour for solar, $60 to $80 for wind. More recent auctions have seen prices decline to $40 to $60 per megawatt hour as competition increased and technology costs fell. These aren't spectacular by international standards, but they're adequate for reasonable returns given local costs. Grid connection in Kazakhstan is challenging. The grid operator, KEGOC, has clear procedures on paper. In practice, grid infrastructure quality varies enormously. Major cities like Almaty and the capital Astana have reasonable grid quality. Remote areas have weak, unreliable grids. Getting grid capacity allocation can take time and requires good relationships with KEGOC and regional utilities. Solar resource in southern Kazakhstan is excellent. Irradiation exceeds 1,600 to 1,700 kilowatt hours per square meter in many locations. This is better than most of Europe, comparable to Spain or Cyprus. Wind resource in western and northern Kazakhstan is also very good. The fundamental renewable resource quality is not the problem. Land availability is extraordinary. Kazakhstan has vast amounts of empty or low-value agricultural land. Land lease costs are minimal by European standards. You might pay $500 to $2,000 per hectare annually depending on location. The challenge isn't availability, but rather securing clear title and navigating local land administration. Permitting involves multiple government agencies at national, regional, and local levels. Environmental assessment is required. Grid connection approvals. Construction permits. The process takes typically 12 to 24 months, sometimes longer. Bureaucracy is substantial, and unofficial facilitation payments are sometimes expected, though this is improving as Kazakhstan works to improve its international business reputation. Labor and supply chain are developing. Domestic EPC capacity exists but is limited in scale and experience. Many developers bring in Chinese or European contractors, which adds cost but increases reliability. Module supply from China is straightforward. Kazakhstan has good logistics connections to Chinese manufacturing. Skilled technical labor is available in major cities, but scarce in remote areas. Financing is perhaps the biggest challenge. International project finance for Kazakhstan is difficult. Most Western banks are cautious about the country due to perceived political risk and currency exposure. Chinese development banks provide financing for Chinese-developed projects. A few international financial institutions like EBRD and IFC participate in select projects. Local Kazakh banks provide some project finance but at higher interest rates than Europe, typically 8 to 12% in dollar terms. The practical reality, if you can secure auction offtake and arrange financing, projects can be quite profitable. Construction costs are lower than Europe, perhaps $600 to $900 per kilowatt for solar, depending on location and specifications. Operating costs are also lower. Labor is cheaper, though equipment costs are similar to Europe. Currency risk is real. The Kazakhstani tenge has depreciated significantly against the dollar over the past decade. PPAs are denominated in tenge, though tariffs are indexed to the dollar. But there's implementation lag, and you're exposed to currency movements. Proper hedging or natural hedges, local costs in local currency, are essential. Political risk exists but is manageable. Kazakhstan under President Tokayev has maintained relative stability and continues economic reforms. The government honors PPA commitments. No retroactive tariff cuts like Romania experienced. But you're operating in an authoritarian system where rule of law is less robust than Europe, and presidential or policy changes could affect business environment. From an O&M perspective, Kazakhstan is interesting. The climate is extreme. Summer temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, winter drops to minus 30 or 40 in some regions. This thermal cycling stresses equipment. Dust and sand in southern regions require more frequent panel cleaning. Wind and snow in winter create additional challenges. Professional O&M is essential, and local O&M capacity is undersupplied, creating opportunity. Why Lighthief is in Kazakhstan? We identified this as an emerging market with substantial potential back around 2019 to 2020. The auction system provides bankable offtake. The resource quality is excellent. Competition was limited compared to Europe. We established office in Almaty, hired local team with connections to government and grid operator, developed relationships with banks and contractors, and began developing projects. We've built several solar installations in southern Kazakhstan and have additional projects in development. Performance has been good. The solar resource delivers as expected. Grid integration has been manageable with proper planning. The main challenges have been financing, arranging competitive terms takes time and relationships, and navigating bureaucracy, which requires patience and local expertise. Current market status: Kazakhstan has roughly 2.5 to 3 gigawatts of renewable capacity installed, mostly solar and wind from auction projects. The government target is 15 gigawatts by 2030, which would require roughly doubling capacity every 3 to 4 years. Whether this target is realistic is debatable, but clearly substantial growth is planned. New projects are being auctioned regularly. Competition has increased. Chinese developers are active, some European companies have entered, and local Kazakh companies are developing capabilities. The easy money phase is ending, but opportunities remain for developers who understand the market and can execute efficiently. Looking forward, Kazakhstan's renewable potential is enormous. The country has the space, the resources, and increasingly the political will. The main constraints are grid capacity and financing availability. As grid infrastructure improves and more financing becomes accessible, deployment should accelerate. Kazakhstan won't become the next Germany, but growth from 3 to 10 plus gigawatts over the next decade is plausible. For developers, Kazakhstan requires commitment. You cannot develop from afar. Local presence is essential: office, local staff, relationships with government and utilities. You need emerging market experience and realistic expectations about timelines and complications. But if you make that commitment, the returns can be attractive relative to saturated European markets. Now, let's discuss Uzbekistan. If Kazakhstan is Central Asia's established market, Uzbekistan is the rapidly reforming newcomer that's generating significant international interest. Uzbekistan is slightly smaller than Kazakhstan but more populous, about 35 million people, making it Central Asia's largest population. Historically, Uzbekistan under President Islam Karimov was one of the world's most closed and authoritarian countries. The economy was largely state-controlled, foreign investment was difficult, currency was not freely convertible, and doing business required navigating a nightmarish bureaucracy. Everything changed in 2016 when Karimov died and Shavkat Mirziyoyev became president. Mirziyoyev launched dramatic reforms, liberalizing the currency, improving the business environment, welcoming foreign investment, and specifically targeting renewable energy development as a priority. The change has been remarkable. Uzbekistan's energy system needs help. The country relies almost entirely on natural gas for electricity generation. While Uzbekistan has substantial gas reserves, using them for power generation when they could be exported is economically suboptimal. Electricity demand is growing rapidly, roughly 5 to 7% annually, as the economy develops and population grows. The grid needs massive investment. The government set ambitious renewable energy targets, 5 gigawatts by 2030, with longer-term goals for much more. To achieve this, they've structured probably the most developer-friendly renewable energy program in Central Asia. The mechanism is competitive auctions with very attractive terms. International developers bid for projects in megawatt-scale tenders. Winning projects receive 25-year power purchase agreements, longer than Kazakhstan's 15 years, with credit support from multilateral institutions like the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. This credit support dramatically improves bankability. Auction results have been extremely competitive. Recent solar auctions have seen winning bids below 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's $15 per megawatt hour. These are some of the lowest solar tariffs anywhere in the world, comparable to the Middle East. Wind auctions have been slightly higher, but still quite competitive. How can economics work at such low tariffs? Several factors. Uzbekistan's solar resource is outstanding. Irradiation in many areas exceeds 1,700 kilowatt hours per square meter, among the best globally. Land costs are minimal. Labor is very cheap. Skilled workers earn a fraction of European wages. Chinese developers who've won many projects have extremely low equipment costs and financing from Chinese development banks at favorable terms. For non-Chinese developers, margins are thinner. European or other international developers struggle to compete at the lowest tariff levels. But the pipeline is large enough that even higher-cost developers can find projects, particularly if they bring specific expertise or financing. Grid connection in Uzbekistan is improving but still challenging. The national grid operator is investing heavily in grid modernization, with support from international financial institutions. New substations and transmission lines are being built specifically to accommodate renewable projects. But the process takes time, and in some regions, grid capacity remains limited. Permitting has been dramatically streamlined compared to the Karimov era. The government wants renewable projects to happen quickly. A dedicated agency, the Ministry of Energy, handles project approvals with much less bureaucracy than previously. Environmental assessments are required but not prohibitively complex. Timelines from project award to financial close to construction have been compressed to 12 to 24 months for well-organized projects. Land acquisition is straightforward for state-owned land, which is most suitable renewable energy sites. The government facilitates land allocation to winning auction participants. Private land transactions are more complex but improving as property rights and registries modernize. Financing is interesting. International financial institutions, IFC, EBRD, ADB, World Bank, are actively supporting Uzbekistan renewable projects, viewing the country's reforms favorably. Chinese development banks finance Chinese developers. Commercial banks are increasingly interested as the track record builds. The credit support from multilaterals on the PPA side helps tremendously with bankability. Local currency financing exists, but with limitations. Uzbek som has been more stable since currency liberalization in 2017, but inflation remains relatively high. Most project finance is in dollars or euros with revenues in som, but indexed to hard currency. The practical development experience. Uzbekistan is easier to work in than you'd expect given its authoritarian past. The government genuinely wants foreign investment and renewable projects. Officials are accessible and relatively responsive. Corruption exists but is less overt than in some neighboring countries. The reform momentum is real. Challenges include workforce skill gaps. There's limited local experience with utility-scale renewable construction and operation. Most developers bring in foreign contractors, at least for initial projects. The supply chain is developing. Uzbekistan has good connections to China for equipment, but limited domestic manufacturing. Infrastructure quality outside major cities can be poor. Cultural and language barriers exist. Russian and Uzbek are primary business languages, English less common than in Kazakhstan. From an O&M perspective, Uzbekistan presents similar challenges to Kazakhstan. Extreme temperatures, dust, limited local O&M experience. But the growing project pipeline is creating O&M demand, and professional providers establishing presence early will have advantage. Why this market is interesting? Uzbekistan has gone from essentially closed to very open for renewable investment in just a few years. The government is committed to the sector. The resources are world-class. The auctions provide clear, bankable offtake. International financial institutions are engaged and supportive. Competition exists but is manageable. Current status, Uzbekistan has roughly 1.5 to 2 gigawatts of renewable capacity, commissioned or under construction, mostly solar with some wind. The pipeline is enormous. Projects totaling over 10 gigawatts are in various stages of development and permitting. Whether all these projects actually get built is uncertain, but clearly substantial growth is happening. Major international developers are active. Masdar from the United Arab Emirates, Total Energies from France, Aqua Power from Saudi Arabia, various Chinese state-owned enterprises, plus smaller international and regional developers. This international interest reflects the market's attractiveness relative to other emerging markets. Looking forward, Uzbekistan's potential is substantial. The country has the resources, the government commitment, and increasingly the infrastructure and institutional capacity. Growth from 2 gigawatts to 5+ gigawatts by 2030 seems very achievable. Beyond 2030, if reforms continue, Uzbekistan could become one of Central Asia's largest renewable energy markets. For developers, Uzbekistan is currently more accessible than Kazakhstan for new entrants. The auction system is transparent, the government is welcoming, and international institutions are supportive. You still need local presence and emerging market experience, but the barriers to entry are lower than they were a few years ago. The risk is political. Mirziyoyev is driving reforms, but he's in his mid-60s, and eventually there will be succession. If reforms reverse or stall, the business environment could deteriorate. However, the economic benefits of reform are substantial, creating powerful constituencies favoring continued openness. The bet is that reform momentum is sustainable beyond any individual leader. Finally, let's discuss Kyrgyzstan, the smallest and least developed of our three Central Asian markets, but interesting in its own way. Kyrgyzstan is small by regional standards. Population about 6 to 7 million, roughly the size of a small European country. It's mountainous. The Tian Shan mountain range covers much of the country, giving it spectacular scenery but limited flatland for solar farms. Its poor per capita GDP is around $1,500 to $1,800, substantially lower than Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. And it's politically unstable. Kyrgyzstan has had two revolutions since 2005, multiple changes of government, and frequent political turbulence. So why are we discussing it? Because Kyrgyzstan has two things going for it: extraordinary hydroelectric potential and a surprisingly open business environment by regional standards. Kyrgyzstan's electricity system is dominated by hydropower. Roughly 90% of generation comes from hydro plants, mostly built during Soviet times. This makes Kyrgyzstan's electricity virtually carbon-free already, but the existing hydro plants are aging, poorly maintained, and insufficient for growing demand. The country imports substantial electricity, particularly in winter when river flows are low and demand is high. The government recognizes the need for additional generation. While hydro remains the priority, there are plans for new hydro projects on various rivers. Renewable energy, particularly solar, is increasingly seen as complementary. Solar can provide additional capacity during summer and reduce import dependence. The renewable energy support mechanism in Kyrgyzstan is less developed than Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. There isn't a well-established auction system. Instead, projects are developed through direct negotiations with government agencies and the state-owned electricity company. This creates more uncertainty but also more flexibility for developers who can structure creative deals. Feed-in tariffs exist on paper but are relatively low and not particularly attractive, roughly 5 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour for solar. These tariffs make projects marginally viable at best. More interesting are opportunities for private offtake, industrial consumers, mining companies, telecommunications infrastructure, who pay retail electricity rates and would benefit from cheaper solar generation. Solar resource in Kyrgyzstan is good but varies significantly by location and elevation. Lower elevations in the north and southwest have decent irradiation, 1,400 to 1,600 kilowatt hours per square meter. Higher elevations and valleys have lower resource. The mountainous terrain limits suitable sites. Wind resource is excellent in some specific locations, mountain passes and valleys that channel wind. But wind measurement data is limited, and developing wind projects requires substantial upfront investment in measurement campaigns. Grid infrastructure is poor. The grid is old, poorly maintained, and frequently unstable. Power quality is an issue. Voltage fluctuations, frequency variations. Connecting renewable projects requires careful technical design and often grid reinforcement at developer expense. Permitting is theoretically straightforward but practically complicated. The legal framework is relatively liberal. Kyrgyzstan is more democratic than Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, with less centralized control. But this means more potential veto points. Local governments, environmental agencies, various other stakeholders. Projects can get held up by various bureaucratic issues or local opposition. Land availability varies. State land can be leased, but processes are less streamlined than in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. Private land transactions are possible, but complicated by unclear property rights and fragmented ownership from Soviet-era collective farm dissolution. Financing is difficult. Kyrgyzstan is small, poor, and perceived as risky. International project finance is essentially unavailable for typical projects. Local banks have very limited capacity for project finance. Most projects rely on equity or corporate finance from sponsors. The practical reality: Kyrgyzstan is challenging. The market is small, the infrastructure is poor, financing is difficult, and political risk is substantial. Projects are mostly small-scale, megawatts, not tens of megawatts. Returns, if achievable, need to be high to justify the risks and complications. So why are we there? Several reasons. First, experience. Operating in Kyrgyzstan builds capabilities for emerging markets more generally. If you can successfully develop and operate projects in Kyrgyzstan, you can probably do it anywhere. Second, relationships. We've built relationships with local partners, government agencies, and potential off-takers that provide insight into the broader Central Asian region. Third, opportunism. Occasionally specific opportunities arise. A mine needing reliable power, a municipality seeking to reduce electricity costs, a development project with multilateral support. Where economics work despite the general challenges, we've developed a few small solar installations in Kyrgyzstan, primarily for commercial and industrial clients rather than grid export. These have been profitable despite complications. The key is keeping projects relatively small, securing good offtake agreements, and having realistic expectations about timelines and costs. Current market status. Kyrgyzstan has perhaps 50 to 100 megawatts of solar and wind capacity, mostly small distributed installations. This is tiny by regional standards. The government has targets for several hundred megawatts of renewable capacity by 2030, but achieving this would require substantial improvement in support mechanisms and infrastructure. Development activity is limited. A few Chinese and regional developers have projects in various stages. International development organizations support some renewable projects as part of broader development programs. But the level of activity is modest compared to Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. Looking forward, Kyrgyzstan's renewable energy market will likely remain small and challenging. The country's poverty, political instability, and infrastructure limitations constrain development. However, specific niches exist. Behind-the-meter projects for large consumers, mini-grids for remote communities, small hydro on mountain streams. For developers willing to work at smaller scale and accept higher complexity, opportunities exist. The political risk is the largest concern. Kyrgyzstan has had multiple governments overthrown by popular protests. The current political situation is relatively stable, but instability could return. Any investment in Kyrgyzstan must account for this risk with appropriate hurdle rates and exit strategies. From an O&M perspective, Kyrgyzstan presents unique challenges. The mountainous terrain makes site access difficult, particularly in winter. Skilled technical personnel are scarce. Equipment logistics are complicated, but for the small installed capacity, O&M demand is correspondingly modest. For most developers, Kyrgyzstan isn't worth the effort as a standalone market. But as part of a regional Central Asian strategy, having presence and experience in Kyrgyzstan can provide insights and relationships valuable for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan operations. It's also a hedge. If other markets become more difficult or competitive, having alternative markets where you already operate is valuable. Right? We've walked through all three Central Asian markets. Now let's compare them strategically and discuss how they fit into renewable energy development and investment strategy. Market size and potential. Kazakhstan is largest by area and economic scale. Current market is 2.5 to 3 gigawatts with realistic potential for 10 plus gigawatts by 2035. Uzbekistan is smaller geographically but has larger population and equally ambitious targets. Currently 1.5 to 2 gigawatts with potential for 5 to 10 gigawatts by 2030 to 2035. Kyrgyzstan is tiny, 50 to 100 megawatts currently with limited growth potential, perhaps several hundred megawatts longer term. Resource quality. All three have excellent solar resources comparable to or better than Southern Europe. Uzbekistan edges out slightly with irradiation, exceeding 1,700 kilowatt-hours per square meter in many areas. Wind resource is best in Kazakhstan's open steppes and some locations in Kyrgyzstan's mountains. Support mechanisms. Uzbekistan currently has the most attractive support structure, 25-year PPAS with credit support from multilaterals. Kazakhstan's 15-year PPAS with state off-taker are adequate but less ideal. Kyrgyzstan lacks well-developed support mechanisms, requiring project-by-project negotiation. Bankability and financing. Uzbekistan is most bankable currently due to international financial institution engagement and credit support. Kazakhstan is moderately bankable with some international and Chinese finance available. Kyrgyzstan is essentially unbankable for typical project finance, requiring equity or corporate finance. Development complexity. Uzbekistan is currently easiest for new entrants. Transparent auctions, streamlined approvals, international developer presence. Kazakhstan is moderately complex. Auctions are functional but require local relationships and navigation of more bureaucracy. Kyrgyzstan is most complex. Ad hoc process, weak institutions, poor infrastructure. Political risk. All three are authoritarian or semi-authoritarian systems with elevated political risk compared to Europe. Kyrgyzstan has highest political instability risk, given history of revolutions. Kazakhstan is most stable but with concentrated presidential power and succession concerns. Uzbekistan is in the middle. Stable currently but dependent on continued reform momentum. Economic risk. All three have currency depreciation risk and inflation risk. Kazakhstan's tenge has track record of periodic devaluations. Uzbekistan's isom has been more stable post-reform, but inflation remains elevated. Kyrgyzstan's som is volatile and weak. Infrastructure quality. Kazakhstan has best infrastructure overall, though still below European standards. Uzbekistan is investing heavily in grid modernization. Kyrgyzstan has poorest infrastructure with frequent power quality issues. Corruption and governance. All three have corruption issues. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are improving governance and reducing overt corruption as part of economic modernization. Kyrgyzstan has more diffuse corruption due to weaker central authority. All three require careful compliance and due diligence. Labor and supply chain. Kazakhstan has most developed local EPC capacity and workforce. Uzbekistan has large population providing abundant labor but limited skilled renewable workforce currently. Kyrgyzstan has small workforce with limited relevant skills. All three rely on Chinese equipment supply. Strategic fit for different players. Large international developers, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, are suitable for major players seeking gigawatt-scale pipelines. Kyrgyzstan is too small to merit attention from large developers. Chinese developers. All three markets are accessible and attractive to Chinese companies with equipment and financing advantages. Chinese developers have been most successful in winning auctions. Mid-size international developers, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, offer good opportunities for experienced emerging market developers. Project sizes of 20 to 100 megawatts are typical, suitable for mid-size players. Regional developers. All three markets can work for developers establishing regional Central Asian presence. Having operations in multiple countries provides diversification and allows knowledge and relationship transfer. O&M providers. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have growing installed bases creating O&M demand. Professional O&M capacity is undersupplied, creating opportunity. Kyrgyzstan's small market provides limited O&M opportunity standalone but works as part of regional strategy. Why Lighthief is in Central Asia? We established regional presence to capture opportunities in emerging markets with less competition than Europe. Kazakhstan provides scale and relatively developed infrastructure. Uzbekistan offers rapid growth and international support. Kyrgyzstan provides experience and relationships applicable across the region. Together, they form a coherent regional strategy. Our approach emphasizes local presence. We have offices and local staff rather than trying to develop remotely. We focus on building relationships with governments, grid operators, banks, and local partners. We take time to understand cultural and business practices. We maintain realistic expectations about timelines and complications. The returns justify the effort. Risk-adjusted returns in Central Asia for developers who execute well exceed returns in saturated European markets. Projects have their challenges, but the fundamental economics work and the competition is manageable. Currency strategy is important. We maintain natural hedges where possible. Local costs in local currency offsetting revenue currency exposure. We use careful financial structuring to minimize unhedged currency exposure. We avoid betting on currency movements and focus on operational excellence. Section 5. The future and final considerations, 6 to 8 minutes. Let's discuss where Central Asian renewable energy is heading and what the future might hold. The trajectory seems positive for several reasons. First, all three countries have committed to renewable energy expansion as part of economic development and climate strategies. While these commitments vary in strength and credibility, the direction is clear. Second, international support is increasing. Multilateral institutions view Central Asia as an important region for clean energy investment. China's Belt and Road Initiative includes substantial renewable energy components. European and Middle Eastern developers are increasingly interested in the region. Third, economics are improving. As technology costs decline globally, even challenging markets become viable. Solar costs have reached points where projects work even with moderate tariffs, particularly given Central Asia's excellent resources. Fourth, infrastructure is improving. Grid investments are happening, particularly in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. This enables larger projects and better integration of renewables. Specific growth projections: Kazakhstan plausibly reaches 8 to 12 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2035, up from current 3 gigawatts. This requires sustained policy support and grid investment, but seems achievable. Uzbekistan could reach 6 to 10 gigawatts by 2035 given current momentum. Kyrgyzstan might reach 500 megawatts to 1 gigawatt by 2035 if support improves. Combined, Central Asia could have 15 to 20 plus gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2035, representing substantial growth from current roughly 5 gigawatts. This won't rival China or Europe, but it's significant regional development. The O&M opportunity will grow proportionally. Current installed capacity needs professional maintenance. As the base grows, O&M demand increases. Most existing O&M is inadequate. Projects underperform due to poor maintenance. Professional providers establishing presence now will benefit as the market matures. Technology evolution will affect the region. Lower storage costs make solar plus storage more viable, addressing intermittency concerns. Bifacial panels perform particularly well in high albedo environments like Central Asian deserts. Advanced tracker systems optimize production. Central Asian projects can benefit from these global technology improvements. Regional integration is possible longer term. Central Asia could develop as an interconnected renewable energy region with different countries specializing based on resources. Kazakhstan in wind, Uzbekistan in solar, Kyrgyzstan in hydro. Transmission interconnections could enable power trading. This is decades away but conceptually feasible. Risks that could derail growth: political instability or policy reversal. If governments change priorities or reduce support, deployment could stall. Currency crises that make dollar-denominated debt unsustainable. Grid capacity constraints if infrastructure investment doesn't keep pace. Competition from cheap fossil fuels if natural gas prices remain low. Geopolitical conflicts affecting the region. These risks are real. Central Asia is not a stable, predictable environment. But with proper risk management and realistic expectations, the opportunities outweigh the risks for experienced developers. Final considerations for anyone considering Central Asian renewable energy: don't expect European standards or practices. Things work differently. Timelines are longer, processes are more opaque, relationships matter more than formal procedures. Local presence is essential. You cannot develop or operate in Central Asia remotely from Europe. You need people on the ground who understand the language, culture, and business environment. Partner carefully. Local partners are necessary but must be selected carefully. Due diligence on potential partners is critical. Reputation, connections, capabilities, financial health. Manage expectations. Projects will take longer and cost more than initial estimates. Build contingencies into plans and budgets. Political and regulatory changes will occur. Flexibility is essential. Focus on execution. In emerging markets, competitive advantage comes more from execution excellence than from sophisticated strategies. The developers who succeed are those who can actually build and operate projects reliably despite complications. Be patient. Building presence and pipeline in new markets takes years. Expect to invest substantially before seeing returns. But first-mover advantages in emerging markets can be substantial and durable. So we've explored Central Asia's renewable energy frontier: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. 3 former Soviet republics with excellent resources, growing markets, and substantial challenges. Key takeaways: these markets offer opportunities unavailable in saturated European markets. Resources are world-class, competition is manageable, and risk-adjusted returns can be attractive. But these aren't markets for everyone. They require emerging market experience, local presence, patient capital, and realistic expectations about complications. Kazakhstan is the most developed and stable, suitable for developers seeking scale in a relatively structured market. Uzbekistan is the reforming newcomer with tremendous momentum, ideal for those wanting exposure to rapid growth. Kyrgyzstan is the frontier market, challenging but useful for building capabilities and relationships. Why Lighthief operates in Central Asia? We saw opportunity where others saw only risk. We established presence early, built local teams and relationships, and learned to navigate these markets effectively. The returns justify the effort, and the competitive advantages from being early are valuable. For developers and investors considering Central Asia, the key question is, do you have the capabilities and appetite for emerging markets? If yes, these markets merit serious attention. If no, stick to Europe where risks are lower but so are returns. The O&M opportunity is substantial as installed capacity grows. Professional O&M is undersupplied across the region. Providers willing to establish presence and invest in building local capabilities can capture significant market share. Central Asia won't become the next Germany or Spain for renewable energy, but it doesn't need to. Growth from 5 gigawatts today to 15 to 20 gigawatts by 2035 represents tremendous opportunity for developers who position themselves effectively. In future episodes, we'll continue exploring different aspects of renewable energy development and operations across various technologies and geographies. We'll share more practical lessons from actual project experience, discuss what works and what doesn't, and continue providing honest assessment rather than promotional content. This is Lighthief reminding you that the best opportunities in renewable energy are often in places that most developers are too risk-averse to seriously consider. Sometimes the frontier markets offer better prospects than the comfortable center. Until next time, may your permits be approved, your PPAS be bankable, and your local partners be trustworthy. And perhaps learn to pronounce Kyrgyzstan correctly before your first business meeting there.